Everyone in the house avoided that room, not because it was dangerous, not because anything bad had ever happened there, but because it remembered too much. The room sat at the end of the hallway, its door always closed, not locked, just untouched. Dust gathered along the frame, as if even time hesitated before crossing the threshold. Guests were never shown that part of the house. Conversations quietly changed direction when the door came into view, and no one ever explained why. The girl noticed it on her first night. She had moved into the house with only 2 suitcases and a carefully practiced sense of indifference. It wasn't meant to be permanent, just a place to pause, a place where no one expected explanations. The house itself was old, but not charming in the way people liked to romanticize. The floors creaked without apology. The walls carried faint discolorations where pictures once hung and were removed without ceremony. It felt less like a home and more like a container, holding traces of lives that had passed through quietly. Still, it was quiet, and that was enough, until she saw the door. During the day, the hallway felt ordinary, narrow, forgettable. But at night, something changed. The lights never quite reached the far end, and the shadows seemed to linger longer there. The door didn't call to her. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It simply waited. The first time she asked about it, her roommate paused too long before answering. "Oh, that room?" A smile followed. Thin, polite, unfinished. "We just don't use it." That was all. No explanation, no warning. And somehow that made it heavier than any locked door ever could. For weeks, the girl respected the silence. She passed the door every night on her way to the kitchen, to the bathroom, back to her room. She learned to look straight ahead, learned not to slow her steps. Avoidance, she knew, could become a habit if practiced often enough. But the house had its own habits. At night, when everyone else slept, the hallway changed. The air thickened slightly, like a held breath. And sometimes, only sometimes, she felt it. A presence, not in the room, but around it, not watching, remembering. The first sound came late, long after midnight. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sharp. It was barely a sound at all. More like the soft settling of wood, or the faint sigh of something old adjusting its weight. The girl lay still in bed, eyes open, listening. The sound didn't repeat, but it didn't fade either. It lingered, pressed gently against her awareness like a thought she didn't want to finish. The next night it came again, and the night after that. Always the same, always subtle, always from the direction of the unused room. The girl told herself stories about temperature changes, old pipes, the imagination stretching itself thin in the dark. She had always been good at explaining things away. It was a skill learned early, refined over time. But some explanations feel thinner the more often they're used. On the 7th night, she stopped pretending. She left her room quietly, barefoot on the cold floor. The hallway greeted her with its familiar dimness. The door stood exactly as it always had. She stood before it for a long moment. The house felt still, waiting. Her hand hovered over the knob, uncertainty rising, not fear, but recognition. She knew this feeling. It was the same one that had stopped her from opening emails she never answered, from making calls she rehearsed but never placed, from returning to places that held too much truth. Avoidance wasn't new, it was practiced. The door opened without resistance. The room inside was empty. No furniture, no boxes, no signs of recent use. Moonlight slipped through a narrow window, laying pale shapes across the wooden floor. Dust floated in the air, slow and deliberate, like it had nowhere else to be. The girl stepped inside. The air felt different here, heavier, warmer, as if the room had been holding on to something and hadn't yet decided whether to let go. She closed the door behind her. At first, nothing happened. She stood still, listening, unsure of what she expected. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but intentional. Then, gradually, a sensation settled in her chest. Not a sound, a memory, not hers, but close enough to hurt. Images surfaced uninvited. A woman standing in the center of the room years ago, hands clenched at her sides, swallowing words she was never allowed to speak. A man pacing near the window, rehearsing apologies he never delivered. A child sitting against the wall, learning early that quietness could be mistaken for obedience. The girl's breath caught. "These aren't mine," she whispered. The room did not argue. It didn't need to. She understood then. The room wasn't haunted. It was full of moments that never finished, of feelings that were folded away instead of resolved, of conversations paused mid-sentence and never resumed. The house had absorbed them all. Walls remember pressure, floors remember footsteps, rooms remember presence. People forget? The girl sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn in. Her chest tightened as something inside her shifted, something she had spent years keeping still. She thought of her own unfinished moments, the words she had swallowed to keep peace, the decisions she had delayed until they quietly expired, the parts of herself she had tucked into metaphorical rooms and learned not to visit. The room listened. It did not interrupt. It did not rush her. It did not demand clarity. It simply held the space. Tears came slowly, without urgency. She didn't cry loudly. There was no need. The room already understood. When the tears stopped, the air felt lighter. Not empty, just less burdened. The house creaked softly, a sound so gentle it almost felt like relief. After that night, the door stayed open. No announcement was made. No conversation followed. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. The hallway felt longer somehow, more complete. The girl began to spend time in the room. Not every night, not on a schedule. Just when she felt herself avoiding something again. She didn't always think. Sometimes she just sat. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she listened. The room never answered. It didn't need to. Weeks passed. The girl noticed changes she hadn't expected. She slept more deeply. She hesitated less before opening messages. She said no when she meant no. Yes when she meant yes. Small things, but real. Avoidance lost some of its power when named. The room grew quieter, not because it had forgotten, but because it was no longer carrying everything alone. One evening, a guest wandered down the hallway and paused. "What's in there?" they asked, gesturing toward the open door. The girl smiled, soft and certain. "A room we finally use," she said, and that was enough. At night, when the house settled into itself, the hallway no longer felt tense. The door remained open, moonlight drifting freely in and out. The room did not forget, but it no longer had to remember alone. And the girl, who had spent years avoiding the places inside herself that felt too full, learned something quietly essential. What we avoid doesn't disappear. It waits. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is open the door.